Hello and welcome to this Beyond Shakespeare exploring session. Today we will be exploring The Tragedy of Darius by William Alexander. This is part 3 of The Tragedy of Darius, that is exploring session 3 of The Tragedy of Darius. The first 2 parts, hosted by our ever-faithful Robert Crighton, are available on our YouTube channel. This is a first look, which means we will read the play with occasional pauses for discussion, including stage directions as we read, although in this play there are very few stage directions. To read this play for you, we have assembled a most marvelous team of readers. As King Darius, and later as Nuntius the Messenger, we have...
Hello, Lynsey Beauchamp, actor in Scotland.
As Alexander the Great, plus the final chorus, we have...
Emily C.A. Snyder, actor, playwright, and podcaster in New York City.
Marvelous. As Hephestion, best friend forever of Alexander, we have...
Well, it's Tom from Brighton.
Excellent. As Polystratus, we have...
Rachael, actor on the East Coast.
Excellent. And I'm glad that both our East Coasters escaped the recent hurricane. In a play like this, if there's a tempest, usually you perish in it. So I'm very pleased that they have not perished. And as Sisigambis, the mother of King Darius, plus the chorus in Act 4, we have...
I'm Greg, usually to be found somewhere near Stratford-upon-Avon or Windsor.
A lovely place, Stratford-upon-Avon. And we will be starting at Act 4, Scene 3. If you at home wish to look at the text of this play, there's a version available on the University of Michigan's site, UMich. Yes, the title is The Tragedy of Darius, I think. The story so far is that Darius, king of the Persians, has been defeated in battle by Alexander, who took prisoner his mother, his wife, and his daughter, and his young son. So we first saw Darius very sad at being defeated, and also very worried that Alexander would seduce his queen, having proven to be the better man on the field. As we learn later, he need have had no such worries. His queen is faithful, and Alexander resolves to treat all of Darius's family, all of the women of his family, very well. This doesn't help because Darius's wife unfortunately falls sick, and despite everyone's best efforts, dies. This is reported to Darius, who is impressed with, once his worries about infidelity are laid to rest, he's impressed with with the conqueror's treatment of his family, and says, well, if I have to fall, maybe it should be Alexander that succeeds me. But first, Darius has spoken to the remnant of his army. There are also 2 traitors in what remains of Darius's court, who are plotting to engineer his downfall and deliver him to Alexander as a prisoner. Darius clearly sees this plot, but he also sees that there's no escape. And with that scene ended, and the conspirators and friends and army gone, we go into a speech by King Darius. Act 4, Scene 3, in your own time, Darius.
O stormy state of kings, vain mortal's choice, the glorious height whence greatness groans to fall. Ah, we who courting fame do hunt each voice, to seem but sovereign must be slaves to all. Yet blown like bladders with ambition's wind, on envied sceptres weakly we rely. And whilst swollen fancies do betray the mind, not only the earth but heavens themselves defy. Whilst lofty thoughts tumultuous minds do toss, which are puffed up with popular applause, a state extended by our neighbour's loss, for further trouble but procures a cause. If fortune's dark eclipse clouds glorious light, then what avails that pomp which pride doth claim? A mere illusion made to mock the sight, whose best was but the shadow of a dream. Of glassy sceptres let frail greatness vaunt, not sceptres, no, but reeds, which raised up break, and let eye-flattering shows our wits enchant. All perished are, ere of their pomp men speak. Those golden palaces, those gorgeous halls, with furniture superfluously fair, those stately courts, those sky-encountering walls, do vanish all like vapours in the air. Oh, what affliction jealous greatness bears, which still must travel to hold others down, whilst all our guards not guard us from our fears. Such toil attends the glory of a crown. Where are they all who at my feet did bow, whilst I was made the idol of so many? What joy had I not then? What have I now? Of all once honoured, and now scarce of any. Our painted pleasures but apparel pain. We spend our nights in fear, our days in dangers, balls tossed by stars, thralls bound to fortune's reign, though known to all, yet to ourselves but strangers. A golden crown doth cover leaden cares. The sceptre cannot lull their thoughts asleep, whose souls are drowned with floods of cold despairs, of which base vulgars cannot sound the deep. The bramble grows, although it be obscure, whilst lofty cedars feel the blustering winds, and mild plebeian souls may live secure, while mighty tempests toss imperial minds. What are our days but dreams, our reign a glance, whilst fortune's fever makes us rage and rave, which with strange fits doth to a height advance, till ere pain us we first our life must leave. For glistering greatness by ambition loved, I was the wonder of all gazing eyes, but free from shadows, real essence proved, state's just proportion, ruin only tries. Lo, charged with chains which, though they be of gold, my state's distress diminish not the more. When this preposterous honour I behold, it but upbraids me what I was before. And what was I before? As now I see, though what afflicted was not clearly known, but still in fetters, whilst appearing free, and in a labyrinth of labours thrown. Was I not forced to serve 1,000 humours, to scape the censure of a critic's story, still clogged with cares, enraged with many rumours? O glorious bondage, and O burdenous glory! That dignity which deified me late and made the world do homage to my name, doth not oppose that which pursues my state, but by my fall gives feathers unto fame. My best was but a momentary bliss, which leaves behind this everlasting sting, that of all woes, no woe is like to this, to think I was and am not now a king. No man with me, in all the accomplished joys that satisfy the soul, could once compare. No man may match me now in sad annoys, or any cross which can provoke despair. Thrice fortune did my gallant troops entrap, and I to fall did desperately stand, yet could not be so happy in mishap as to have died by some renowned hand, but for my greater grief, disgrace and scorn, the minds of men so apt are to deceive. They whom aloft my favours wings had borne, even they have made their master thus a slave. Ah, did not death in prison from me reave the sacred sovereign of my soul's desires? And I, wretched I, not present to receive the last cold kiss that should have quenched my fires. Yet, O thrice happy thou, who hast not lived to bear a burden of this great disgrace, more than 1,000 deaths this had thee grieved, to know I died, and died in such a case. Oh, do the pledges of our mutual love, the only comfort that the fates have left, rest prisoned yet? And may I not remove my mother thence, as of all power quite reft? My pains are more than with my pleasures even, since first my head was burdened with a crown. Was I exalted once up to the heaven, that to the centre Jove might throw me down? My ample empire and my princely birth, my great magnificence and vain excess, all cannot yield my mind 1 minute's mirth to ease me now in this my great distress. Lo, here reduced unto the worst of ills, past help, past hope, and only great in grief, 2 abject vassals make me wait their wiles, not looking, no, nor wishing for relief. If that my honour had been first repaired, then what though death had this frail fortress won? I wail my life, since for disgrace prepared, not that it ends, but that it was begun. What fatal conflict can my countenance mar, though me to brag death all his horrors bring? I never shall wrong majesty so far as ought to do that not becomes a king.
Some new disaster daily doth foreshow our coming ruin. We have seen our best, for fortune bent us wholly to throws down our kingdom from her wheel's height so low that by no means his state can be redressed. For since by armies his power hath been repressed, both friends and servants leave him all alone. Few have compassion of his state distressed to see, so to him themselves a number falsely doth show. So foes and faithless friends conspired in one frail fortune, and the fates with them agree, all run with hatchets on a falling tree. This prince in prosperous state hath flourished long, and never dreamed of ill, did thank far less, but was well followed while his state was strong. Him flattering sirens with a charming song strive to exalt, then whilst he did possess this earthly dross, that with a vain excess he might reward their mercenary love. But now, when fortune drives him to distress, his favourite to me remained among, they straight her as hers, their faith remove, and who for gain to follow him will want, they after gain by his destruction hunt. Oh, more than happy 10 times were that king, who were unhappy but a little space, so that it did not utter ruin bring, but made him prove a profitable thing, who of his train did best deserve his grace, then could and would of those the best embrace. Such vultures fled as followed but for prey. the faithful servants might possess their place. As all gallant minds it must with anguish sting, whilst wanting means their virtue to display. This is the grief which bursts a generous heart. When favour comes by chance, not by desert, those minions oft to whom kings do extend above their worth immoderate goodwill, the buttes of common have oft bitten end. In prosperous times they only do depend not upon them, but on their fortune still, which if it change, they change them, though they fill their hopes with honour and their chests with oil. Yet if they fall or their affairs go ill, then those whom they raise will not with them descend, but with the side most strong or strength to join, forget all what was given before. And once, well, then they can expect no more. The truth thereof in end this strange event in Bessus and Nebarzanes hath proved, on whom their prince so prodigally spent affection, honor, titles, treasure, rent, and all that might an honest mind so bountiful a prince still to have loved, who so benignly tendered, had their state yet traitors, all due respect removed, they him to strike the strength he gave have bent. So as he now may rule, although too late, that sly chameleons changing thus their hue, to servants were preferred who still were true. But though those traitors for a space do speed, no doubt the heavens once vengeance will exact. The very horror of this heinous deed doth make the hearts of honest men to bleed. Yes, even the wicked hate this barbarous act. The heavens no higher a choler can contract than for the forcing of a sacred king, whose if rage do them not their minds distract, must fear and reverence in inferiors breed, to whom from him all what is theirs doth spring. But though on the earth men should neglect this wrong, heaven's will those traitors may ere it be long.
And we will pause there for discussion at the end of Act 4. So the speech of Darius doesn't seem to follow directly on from the previous scene. It seems to take place after the battle. Is that what we're gathering, Lynsey?
I thought so, because it seems that Darius is already a prisoner. He's aware that he's been the victim of a treacherous plot by these two naughty ones, and he's bewailing his state, and also bewailing with dramatic irony the fact that he used to think he was happy and blessed. It's quite the bit where he talks about his wife without naming her is, I think, the sort of shift point in the speech, without having studied it at length. Seems to be the point, which goes from, well, it's storytelling and also lament, and also a kind of this is how it is for those who are seeking greatness.
Yes, and for those of us who were here in session 1, Darius's first speech more or less followed that pattern, that he first gave us a general overview of his situation, having been defeated, but then talked about how concerned he was for the fate of his wife, a prisoner. So we get the same. I think you're right. I think it is a shift in that speech. Any other thoughts from the room? Emily.
Although to dovetail off of what you both were just saying, it's so interesting because the hiccup that we had yesterday for Regina did the same thing where there was a shift in the speech halfway through, where she was talking about Alexander, then talking about Darius, which was a little difficult. The playwright doesn't ever seem to name anyone, so that's so well done, Lynsey, knowing what was happening. But something that I felt in this past speech, we were talking about it in the chat, that I didn't feel throughout the rest of this play, was at the first half of the speech, our page 37, I believe, was almost the iambic pentameter was so smooth by and large, with just a few sort of like ornaments of an occasional anapest or something. And I could hear it so beautifully in the voice. And then at the turn, when it became personalized, we went back to what I consider like what I've gotten accustomed to with Alexander's writing, which is there may be a steady-ish beat, but a really irregular rhythm that I would be loath to call sprung rhythm, because sometimes it could be difficult to sort out the waves and the valleys and things. But one of our questions was, does this indicate interior, change from like, I'm fine, I'm talking about my state, to which is something perhaps only Lynsey can speak to.
I mean, I think yes. I mean, I think that's that. He talks about his wife. He talks about his mother, and then that is not too far from the end of the speech, really. I think. I mean, it's very interesting comparing this with what we were reading last week. And again, I was only here for one session last week, but this, I don't know if this is later, but this really does seem as if there is more dramatic power in this. There's more of a dramatic flair rather than just a kind of rhetorical, let's have a rhetoric contest, sort of speechifying, as it were. This seems to it's still very formal, but it's there's much more character in it, I feel.
I thought it was very soulful. It was a long speech, but it was very soulful and reflective, and therefore enthralling. I mean, entertaining, if you will, because of that downbeat, that at the end of the day, and all the dust has settled, and what are we really? And the old sort of like Steve Jobs type of, I'm dying, but what was it all about anyway? So it was lovely and reflective of a life.
Yeah. And going back to what Emily was saying about the verse form becoming possibly a little more disorderly, and Rachael also, you pointed out some things about the rhyme scheme, didn't you?
I think Emily noticed something more about that as it went on, it was getting there was more play with that rhyme scheme. But if it's more, composed in the beginning as opposed to the end, then there's that. I think that helps with that shift that you guys were talking about in terms of the writing. It helps support that for an actor. But it also shows that, I don't know, that change, that he's a little more composed, and he seems to be breaking down, I guess, as we're moving on. But I'm not that good with rhyme schemes or things like that.
Yeah. I mean, Emily.
No, the rhyme is regular. The rhythm is off. So it's still like ba 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 ba, but as opposed to sort of, I mean, well, iambic would be ba da ba da ba da ba da. It'd be like ba da ba 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 da da da. It's jazzy, and yet sometimes in his other jazzy bits, it can be very difficult to understand. And I was following Darius fairly well, which, yeah, I mean, the drama was there. The chorus this time, I was a little surprised because we've had such a cheeky chorus this entire play. And this chorus also sounded like just sort of done, but also more removed than the other choruses, which was a little surprised. And I didn't note this while Greg was reading, but I think part of the lack of cheekiness comes from the fact that the chorus is also written in pentameter, whereas the other choruses have been written in trimeter. So to begin with, the other choruses have just been like jabby. They've been like ba 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 ba, right? And this one is ba da ba da ba da ba da ba da, and it's just harder to be cheeky with that rhythm. And that it's neither good nor bad. It's interesting that the chorus is kind of vibing instead with our lead character. And in some ways, having seen the whole play up to this point, I feel very circular. Like I've come back to the beginning, and even the chorus has been won over to Darius's vibe.
Yeah, I agree that chorus is much more elegiac in feel and a little bit less combative. A little bit in the previous choruses in this play, we've really loved them because they've challenged the action and they've actively criticized some of the characters' decisions. But this one, we've got, you're right, it's in pentameter. We've got a 12-line pentametric stanza. The rhyme scheme is different from the ABAB quatrains we've seen go before, but that's standard with these choruses. But you're right, the longer, in general, we're finding higher energy with the shorter line, and a little bit more relaxed energy with the longer line. I did see. I mean, going back to the Darius speech, I did perceive a little disorder not only in the rhythm but a few more uses of near rhymes. Although, I mean, Lord knows, OP we can't even speculate. But there was one moment which Rachael pointed out where the word slave ended a line, and the rhymes around it were deceive, reeve, receive. So to me that stands out. That's not a near rhyme I've often seen in early modern verse. And later we've got remove and love. That's a near rhyme you often do see in early modern verse. So, I mean, this is published 1604. We're working from the 1637 edition. Who knows whether norms of pronunciations have changed in the intervening 30-some years. But yeah, the thing about Alexander is he's a really good poet, but is he capable of dramatizing the verse to that extent where a little disorder in the verse reflects disorder in the character? Is he doing that deliberately, or is he just doing it instinctively? Emily?
My feeling is that this is instinctive because he's indiscriminate with his rhythm throughout the entire play. So, as opposed to, because this really does not feel like a guy that has ever acted in his life. And so, let alone, like, again, like we talked about with Croesus, ever had to deal with a costume change or shuffling a chorus off, or, any of the practicalities of the stage, which is fine, but it creates just differences. And throughout the entire play, most of these plays, he uses an extremely irregular rhythm. He will generally choose a beat and then have an irregular rhythm, which I find exciting because, again, verse dramatists in English get so, like, seduced or browbeaten into having a very strict meter, whatever that meter is. But they're like, even if they're saying, I'm doing all trochees, like, they get intense about it, and they just do that. And in some ways, I think his lack of training in that sort of dramatic verse does this. And whereas, just writing poetry, you can use sprung rhythm a bit more. It was more acceptable. In some ways, like that's helping him so he's not slavish to it, but it's hurting him because he's not using it for any dramatic reason. So in this case, it's a happy accident that he goes back to his irregular rhythm once the emotions change. But I don't think you're going to find that consistently throughout.
Yeah, we'll have to keep an eye out for it. Lynsey.
Yeah, just in brief on this point, I wouldn't be surprised if it was some kind of original pronunciation thing where slave might have been more pronounced slave, kind of way, so that the rhyme would be closer in original pronunciation. Not that I know anything about that, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Fair enough. I mean, slave, the A sound is a diphthong between E and E in any case. Who knows what the weight of that diphthong in 1604 would have been. But we are now moving into Act 5. The final act. The scene has shifted to Alexander's camp, and we have Alexander and Hephestion commenting on the recent victory. They will soon be joined by Polystratus. Now, I'm unclear on whether Polystratus is Alexander's soldier or Darius's, but we will find out, I guess. And Hephestion opens the scene. In your own time, Hephestion.
What story or what fable can record of such numerous troops so strangely lost? I know they quake to know it was my lord, whose name alone is worth another's host. It scarce can trusted be in many parts, but traitors fear, though all the world them back. They were but bodies destitute of hearts. More prisoners they were than men to take. Who would believe so few durst strive to meet so great an army? And the army shrinks. But glory's flattery and fame's sounds are sweet. True valor dare attempt all that it thinks.
In this encounter to have had the best, it would content more than a common mind. But since we want the chief, what of the rest? I must in all a satisfaction find. Those traitors thought to finish thus the war, by giving me their lord whom they have bound. But I, who march with confidence so far, do scorn to build upon so base a ground. To venge my wrongs dare others then designed, since Darius was ordained my prey to be. How durst they but have aimed at aught of mine? His o'erthrow's glory did belong to me. Whilst in himself he only did confide, I, by all means, did strive to make him bow. But since his hard estate abates that pride, my fury turned is to compassion now. Though he contemned me oft, and did me wrong, yet am I grieved that he was thus deceived. But if acknowledged once to be more strong, I, not of his blood, nor yet his kingdoms craved. And if those traitors have not killed him straight, yet his delivery shall my name renown. I would not lose a subject of such weight, by which my clemency might be made known.
Sir, now your coming cannot do him good.
What? Are all fled? None have my force withstood?
Yet cannot Darius be redeemed again?
Why? Have they set him free, or is he slain?
Now he enjoys a liberty at last, but ransomed is by offering up his breath.
Then is all Asia's expectation past? Tell on length the manner of his death.
The boiling ardor of the rising sun, all moisture gone, did breed so great a drouth, that from the way I had a little run, to find some fountain to refresh my mouth. There by the borders of a rising brook, which shadowed was from Titan's rising beams, from liquid crystals I a tribute took, which seemed to murmur that I forced their stream. When, lo, I saw a lamentable sight, 2 wounded horses draw a bloody couch, which clad with skins show horror at the height. And it to spy when I did approach, one was within, who could not long time scape the fatal passage of the infernal gates. Yet majestic triumphing o'er mishap, he seemed to braggart both fortune and the fates, and to so base a state as first not born, then whilst his blood abundantly did fall, he burst forth those words in fortune's scorn, as one whose courage nothing could appall. You gaze to see, and have good cause, wherefore a man no man, a king no king, what change? Now less than naught, who once was both and more. This would seem wondrous, but no state is strange. And yet amidst my evils I must rejoice, that this last comfort doth forego my end. I speak to one who can conceive my voice, and not in vain my dying speeches spend. I am, but how? In name, and not in power. That wretched Darius, which I should suppress, once happy as was thought, but at this hour a lively pattern of extreme distress. Then having paused, he said, my grief is great, till Alexander, as the world may spy, that though of me he never had but hate, yet am I forced far in his debt to die. The favor past extended to my queen, and that poor remnant my surviving rest, when weighing well what I to him have been, I can wish continued, but can scarce request. They to his foe belong, and yet he strives to have them honored now, as in times past. But those who held of me both states and lives, of state and life have me deprived at last, and treat him too that unrevenged below, I wonder not as hapless in all things. Let men his justice and their treason know. This, as a common cause, doth touch all kings, beside the honor which he shall acquire in plaguing them who have betrayed my trust. His magnanimity men shall admire, and fear to grieve him whom they find so just. As watery rounds which rise and reel in rain, do swell and float, yet when they break, though bright, last, leave, when fallen, no token save a stain. Pomp quickly thus both courts and scorns the sight. And since my glass is run, my glory gone, I dead unto the world to me, I wish, save his, that the earth adore no throne, for from his reign what subject would be free? Then dropping down, faint, bloodless, and half dead, he prayed me for some water that ran by, a small request by such a monarch made, which when that he had got, yet ere I die, this cross must come, said he, to kill me quite. Though nations once to me as sovereigns sought, I have not now the power but to requite this little benefit that thou hast brought. But Alexander shall reward thee well, in him the heavens still yielding his desires, since that his foes, though envy burst, must tell that courtesy which all the world admires. Now none hath power his pleasure to control, but if he use them well whom he retains, it will procure contentment to my soul, and make him famous whilst the world remains. When breath abandoned hath this brittle clay, then cause some friend defray my funeral cost, that churlish Sharon force me not to stray where darkness dwells, an unregarded ghost. Last, give my corpse to her who brought it forth, who may it with my ancestors entomb, and since she loved me much, though little worth, may wail this burden which once graced her womb. And to that prince whose state I wish to stand, In sight of love which all my thoughts do send, my soul gives him my heart, it thee my hand. Thus, though I lived his foe, I die his friend. I had but held his hand a little space, when dying like a torch whose wax is spent, in spite of pain, even with a princely grace, his hands still seemed directing as he went.
Who could refrain from tears to hear declared the huge mishaps which all at once did light? Have subjects slain their prince whom strangers spared? Us hath he fled that perish thus he might. I for his fall am wonderfully sorry, whom first I forced, but last would have maintained. I envy death, because it robed the glory which I, by giving him his life, have gained.
Since death has put a period to his woes, that flavor which to him you would extend, let it with fury flame against his foes, for your designs can have no fairer end. So shall you both the people's love obtain, whilst by means revenge their sovereign's rest. And likewise may the more securely reign, the state well purged from such contagious pests. If but one virtue did adorn a king, it would be justice. Many great defects are valid thereby, whereas each virtuous thing in one who is not just, the world suspects.
Though this is your counsel, nor yet his request, had not the power to penetrate my ear, a generous stomach could not well digest so great a wrong which courage storms to bear. My sprite, impatient of repose, disdains that they so long their infamy survive. But I will punish with most grievous pains the monstrous treason that they did contrive. What? Do they think, though backed with numerous bands, that Bactra is a bulwark for mine ire? Fly where they list, they cannot scape my hands. My wrath shall follow like a consuming fire. Such damned souls the heaven cannot receive. All force hell's dungeons as Alcides did, and they on the earth no bounds but mine can have. I'll search them out in the centre hid, and when, as threatening now, I once may strike betwixt the bending boughs of some strong tree, to traitors, terrors, who intend the like, they shall by violence dismembered be.
Sir, may it please you to extend your care, that some his funeral offices perform?
Go, presently, and everything prepare, as best becomes the military form.
And there we will quickly break. This is the penultimate scene, so next scene is the last. And Alexander and Hephestion and Polystratus an unexpectedly wonderful speech for Polystratus, who also gets to report the last words of Darius, so the actor gets to play both roles. How do we feel that speech? Any thoughts from the room, or this scene in general? Rachael.
It's that subtlety that he never really names people, that I think it takes time to get used to this writing style to make those shifts, and that he has such a rhythm that's individual to him, that does make these shifts that are very interesting and fun to play, but are when you're unfamiliar with him, which I think everybody in this room, before last week or something, was, that it shifts slightly, and then you figure out who he's actually talking about a little ways after, if that makes any sense.
It's true. Darius, in Darius's reported in the reported words, Darius doesn't even name himself until he has given about 6 or 8 lines of his death speech. Although he's dying within a pretty luxurious chariot, so I guess it would be obvious who he is. And Alexander is upset by hearing this because he was planning to take him prisoner and let him live? Is that the situation, Emily?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I feel like the playwright just loves Alexander, because every time Alexander comes on, he's like, with the exception of that first scene where he's kind of Marlovian and is saying, no, I'm going to be strong. And then the chorus is all, both his courtier and the chorus are like, bad idea. Apart from that, Alexander has kind of been, a peer's plowman, a sort of, this is what a king should be. Is he going to try to steal a wife and kill the son? Nope, no interest in that. Is he going to be taken in by these traitors? Nope, he sees right through them, and he'll, actually show why, hang them up as a warning to others. Is he going to do terrible things to Darius? No, he was going to let him live. Which curiously is the same thing that Croesus does in the other play with the guy that let him down and got his son killed. Croesus, the guy who messed up and got the son killed.
Adrastus,
that's it. Thank you so much. I'm terrible with names. He wanted to die because of his shame. And Croesus is like, I pardon thee. And we see that with Alexander too. There's very much I pardon thee. Not traitors, but I pardon everyone else. And yet curiously, as Alexander, I had a very difficult time finding a character. Like I had, it's a problem when you see people write anyone they admire, or if they try to write a saint, or if they try to write a nun, or, anyone they feel is good. Personality kind of goes out the window, and there's kind of nothing there to play. So it was only till the very end where I'm like, I'm going to do something with the traitors. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, this is something. The other thing is that I'm finding, particularly in this act, that the playwright is inverting so many of his grammatical sentences. So he's putting the subject to the verb, but not in any place that makes rhythmic or necessarily grammatical sense. So I don't know if listeners will notice, but like we're tripping over language a lot. And there are several places where like I noticed that I put in an extra preposition or something, or an extra article, an a or the or to, by accident, because he didn't have it there, and it would be tripping to do it otherwise. So it's not, he's got some irregular rhythm that, yes, you have to get used to, but this act is a little sloppy for this playwright. He's usually, as someone else said in the chat, much more precise than this. And the rhythm, though irregular, is usually not grammatically mealy.
Yeah, Lynsey.
Yeah, and just to that point, I find, in very quickly going through this before the session today, I just added punctuation or altered punctuation so that as I was, trying to essentially sight read, I could just get a handle on how to kind of navigate that particular forest of beasts of language. And I think that's perfectly okay to do that, really, because the punctuation is presumably an editor's rather than Sir William's. So we're not being sacrilegious. But that, to me, that's the only, like, there were some lines where I really couldn't work out what was being said until I thought, well, what happens if I put a comma there or a parentheses here or whatever? And I still didn't understand everything I said, but loud and wrong is always the way.
As an American, loud and wrong is basically my country's history. But it's important to note for anyone viewing that there are some inaccuracies in the text that we're working from, because they tend to be the PDFs that you get from early English books online, EBO, and those texts tend to be scanned, and sometimes scan errors are left in. Especially, the scan can't always tell a full stop from a comma. For example, or a speck of dirt at the end of the line from a full stop. So I think Lynsey's experience with verse of this kind is so extensive that I think your instincts are going to be perfectly good when it comes to structuring it with punctuation. And if we're doing this on the fly, we can only take our best shot. That's what Alexander would say, I think.
And I think, forgive me, I think with courtly things, for his audience, you'll want to try and get the magnanimous, the all-powerful Alexander wanting, like that trope of wanting a good enemy, because your adversary is the only person who could really understand you, really get where you're so lonely at the top of the pile. And I think he would try and get that for his audience to, so everybody could nod sage-like and go, yes, being a king is a lonely captaincy type of thing.
Yeah. Alexander. Sorry, Rachel, go on.
No, I was just gonna tag on to what Tom said. That a rival also gives you something to aspire to. It drives you further than you would have gone if you did not have somebody to compete against. And maybe that fits into the some of the other parts of this play, like with how we were talking about Hephestion the other day, and this idea of male military competition, your comrades, the people driving, that like bond that so many people would have understood in that day of being important.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that, yes, it was, I think yesterday we were talking about heroic friendship between men and how it was seen in early modern days as one of the highest and purest forms of relationships between two people unrelated by blood. And how that was potentially of use in a society where military service was the norm for men. It was useful to override people's survival instinct with a friendship so intense that you would protect each other with your lives. Which brings us to, what role does Hephestion play in this scene? If Alexander is the type of a virtuous monarch, and you're right, it's an almost impossible thing for an actor to play. It's people who embody virtues, as well as romantic leads, often tend to be a little bit characterless. They tend to simply embody the emotion or the virtue that they're supposed to embody. So with all this, Hephestion seems to be a person who can address him directly as a friend, as a partner, as someone who's been with him since their boyhood in Macedonia, and as the co-equal in that heroic friendship relationship, which who am I to state its nature or to speak its name? So Hephestion is the one who subtly guides Alexander from saying, I'm sorry Darius has died, and I'm angry about it because I was going to let him live. And Hephestion says, well, why don't you take your wrath out on these traitors then? So, And we saw Hephestion comment on Alexander's reaction to the imprisoned Persian women as well, saying, "Oh, you don't want to take advantage of these ladies. That's very virtuous of you, Alexander." And however, yes, Emily.
Yeah, there is an element of Hephestion in this play being used as Alexander's hype man, because he does go around saying, "You're so virtuous. You're so virtuous," and he does it here again. Let's see. If but one virtue did adorn a king, it would be justice. Many great defects are veiled thereby, whereby each virtuous thing in one who is not judged the world suspects. Yeah, he's talking about you're going to get your people's love. Yeah, he's a good influence, but he's also a bit of a hype man for the audience.
He is. I'm interested in how he appears to sort of direct Alexander, though, at times, to be the advisor that Alexander listens to. Unlike Bessus and Narazanes, an advisor with the best interests of Alexander at heart.
He would always have to know his place. He would always have to know his place, in the sense that he can advise, but he must have the correct decorum to not overstep. Well, he can dare to overstep. I mean, the first rule of a samurai is to tell the truth, and then you're allowed to kill yourself. You're allowed to throw yourself off a cliff. So you must tell the truth, but at the same time there would be this contrition, not too contrite, but not, yes, I'll steer you this way and we'll look at it in this way and things like that. But I don't think he can outrightly say, well, he says it beautifully anyway.
He does. Emily.
Yeah, just looking briefly at Polystratus to sort of move slightly. Again, thinking of, so this is neoclassical. We're not going to see the death of kings on stage. We're going to have a long speech, which, by the way, was hilarious, with Alexander saying, "Tell on length the manner of his death." It's like, great, fantastic. But this reminded me actually very much, again, I know we keep comparing these two, but to Croesus's speech, no, not Croesus, to Darius's speech, because Darius shows up at the end of Croesus's play, which is probably why, this feels like the Sir William Alexander extended universe here. Darius shows up and then has that beautiful part of the speech where he tells about this woman's death, and it's very narrative, it's very interesting. Polystratus, as you were saying, could almost be interesting about the staging, because do you have Polystratus actually played by the guy who's playing Darius, which would be interesting, but just in a different hat, or from Beyond the Grave, or, that might be interesting. Do you have tableau behind him, just so that you know who he is and because Polystratus, there's no quotation marks throughout this entire piece. So and very few colons even, to figure out when Polystratus is speaking I on his own behalf and when he is speaking I in relating what Darius said. So you have actually, though, I think some really interesting staging choices in this speech that you don't always get in a neoclassical Act 5, let's explain what happened speech. So that might be just really interesting to explore on stage.
True. And, one effect of possibly doubling Darius with Polystratus would be that when Polystratus reports Darius's last words, it's the voice of that character speaking. That would be an interesting thing. Although in this reading, of course, we have Darius doubling the messenger who's about to bring the news of Darius's demise to his family. We will have that last scene, we will have a last chorus, and then we will have a last discussion. Yes, we're about to meet a new character. I mean, not a new character, but we're about to go back to Sisigambis, mother of King Darius. And yes, in your own time, Sissy, take it away.
Alas, I've charged my soul with fears. Speak, for my life doth on thy lips depend. Thy countenance, doleful copy bears of some sad summons to denounce my end. Starve not my ears, which famish for thy words, though when they swallowed may but make me burst.
The message, madam, which my soul affords must once be known, and once known still accursed.
Be not a niggard of ill news.
And why?
Fame will tell all the world.
But first to you.
Tell soon.
Your son is dead.
Then let me die.
For joys and pleasures are all perished now.
Why opens not the earth straight to devour a hopeless caitiff who all good hath lost? The longer that I live, my grief grows more, as but to me born, kept to be crossed. Would God this mass where misery remains, a weight of earth from sight of men might keep, or that the seas or raging through the plains would make my tomb amidst their turning deep. Oh, Alexander, hast thou robed his life, yet entertained me still in hope to find him? Why didst thou not first kill this poor old wife who was not worthy to have lived behind him? What that I should live till thou my son had slain was all thy kindness for this cause employed.
You wrong that prince, for he with haste in vain came him to help, whom others had destroyed.
What impious thoughts does dream so vile a deed, a monarch's murder, ancient glory's end?
Two, whom he raised, did his confusion breed. He found his friend his foe a friend.
Tell on the message, messenger of death. Load my mind with mountains of distress. Tears may drown my sight, so I choke my breath, while sorrow all my senses doth possess.
When Alexander, who at peace repined, did, save submission, hold all offers vain, bent of stern Mars to try the doubtful mind, a general muster Darius did ordain. And in one battle bent to venture all, he caused his will be publicly proclaimed, whilst two vile traitors did conspire his fall, who Bessus and Narbazanes were named. Those two in council did discover first some portion of the poison of their heart, which caused the king suspect, but not the worst. Yet with the sword he sought to make them smart. But having escaped what first was feared from rage, they seemed so much their error to lament, his indignation that they did assuage, false hypocrites pretending to repent. Whilst Artabazus, as an honest man who judged of others by his upright mind, no fraud conceived, sought more to scape than scan what they with craft to compass crowns design.
A mind sincere is ever least suspicious. These think all faulty, who themselves are vicious.
They urged him with the king to intercede, that in his favor he would give them place, and did protest that by some valorous deed they labor would to gain again his grace. Then Artabazus came and told the king that in the battle he might try their faith, and both before his majesty did bring, who, when submiss, did quickly calm his wrath. with hands stretched up to heaven and humbled knees, with tears like those which crocodiles do shed, woe in their face and pity in their eyes, did for compassion, though from rigor, plead. The king of nature mild did them receive, and them who thus but for the form complained, not only all relenting quite forgave, but wept in earnest too, whilst they but feigned. When in his coach, from all suspicion free, with countenance sad, long following on behind, as still pretending supplicants to be, they bowed to him whom they were bent to bind. The Grecian captain, curiously near, when marked a suitor, craved what he required, by pregnant proofs did evidently clear what treason was against his state conspired. He told what way their purpose might be tried, and how the Bactrians were for trouble bent. Then for his safety prayed him to provide, by straight with him retiring to his tent. But in the king, who did neglect his state, no kind of care this friendly offer bred, so that it seemed he by some powerful fate was headlong forward to confusion led. The Greek passed thence despairing him to save, who thus all means to help himself refused, with subtle words then Bessus there did crave to purge himself, and errors past excused. Old Artabazus, happening to approach, the king to him did patron's speech report, who then perceived what danger did encroach, and wished he would, where Greeks were strong, resort. But in his breast this purpose firmly placed, that from his subjects he would never fly. With mutual tears they tenderly embraced, and parted there like two who went to die. Now silent night, in pitchy vapors clad, had mustered mists and marched out of the west. Day's beauties darkening, shadowy horrors spread. The sentinels were set, and all at rest. When lo, a terror did distract the host, whose bands to murmur were dispersed in parts, with sounds resembling ships in storms near lost, whilst to each other cause of fear imparts. Those who their king appointed were to guard from what was due by fraud or fear did stray, and to his danger having no regard, his fortune's minions fled with her away. The desolation then grown wondrous great, with some few eunuchs Darius left alone, no strength remaining, nor no sign of state. He thus them spake, who for his fall did moan, "Go, part in peace, ere further harm be had, lest that my ruin likewise you surprise." They hearing those sad words, as men gone mad, went howling through the host with dolorous cries, so that all those who heard what plaints they made thought that they had their sovereign's death bewailed. And forcing trust, some forged reports were spread that he had killed himself. All hope quite failed. The Persians, grieved whilst these things did occur, did first encourage all their country bands to help their prince, but yet they durst not stir for fear of falling in the Bactrians' hands. Even in the time when this confusion was, the traitors, to defer the fact no more, did to their sovereign's tent with squadrons pass, and took and bound him whom they served before. who in a golden coach once proudly rode, was thrown in one for common carriage used, and who of late was honored like a god, two of his own, as if their slave abused. Those royal hands to bear a scepter born were basely bound, and which the more him grieved, thus misery can hardly scape from scorn, with bands of gold, which burdened, not relieved. When Alexander, great with courage, spied our armies fly, he who in hope them chased, to follow us with diligence did ride. Base seemed the conquest which no danger graced. But when at length, by some informed, how he was made to captive, a captive to his own, at this indignity he highly stormed, as if by it his hopes had been o'erthrown. Out of his host he did select a few, who were best horsed and fit for such a fight, with whom his foes he did so fast pursue, that ere they could suspect he came in sight. The traitors, vexed when spying him appear, came to the cart whereat the king did stay, and called to horse in haste, since foes were near, lest that they else might find him for a prey. He looked aloft and cried aloud, I see that Nemesis is frowning from above. Should I with traitors as a captive be, and fly from him who but brave wars doth move? Then those in whom impiety abounds throw darts at him, vile beasts to be abhorred, and hurt the horses with 100 wounds than men more trusty, dying for their Lord. As false in hearts, so feeble with their hands, when guilt and danger doubled had despairs, the traitors first, then all their traitorous bands, fled from a number less by half than theirs. But to the bounds of death's pale kingdom brought, the king retired, where least by people spied, more wounded with ingratitude than aught, did leave the world whose folly he had tried. The last divorce which lasts was scarcely made twixt soul and body, whilst the eyes grew dim, when Alexander came and found him dead, who labored had so long to ruin him. And whilst his tears a general mourning moved, that stately vesture which himself arrayed, much feared for valor, more for virtue loved, with his own hand on Darius' corpse he laid. Then wailing long, as for a brother lost, to have his funerals furnished like a king's, he bids you use his wealth and spare no cost, for you shall want no necessary things. He hath his body hither sent by me, and funeral rites solemnly bent to do. He thinks that they may best accomplished be, whilst who him bred doth see him buried too.
Behold how grief hath her of sense bereft, whilst breath for passage struggling is with groans. No will nor power to live, just grief hath left, since what she valued vanished is at once.
Ah, shall I see? No, let me first be blind, that body breathless which I brought to light. Where would my soul of force sufficient find that could encounter with so sad a sight? Oh, flinty heart, what hinders thee to break, since crushed with cares a stranger to repose? Why part'st thou not, poor soul, that whilst I speak in opening of my lips, mine eyes may close? This heritage of death, this withered stock is but a place appointed for despairs, a torture to itself, a stumbling block, whose aged furrows fertile are in care. Once for good fortunes, now for bad designs, a state betrayed, drawn forth from calm repose, to have been happy most afflicts my mind, who raised to fall got much the more to lose. Ah, me! Malicious fates have done me wrong, who first came to the world should first depart, and why should the old outlive the young? This nature wrongs by preposterous art. Why should death so indiscreet be found to span a caitiff, to spoil a prince? My half-dead body, bending to the ground through grief, is grown ripe for the grave long since.
What makes vain worldlings so to swell with pride, who come of the earth, and soon to the earth returned? So hellish furies with their firebrands burn proud and ambitious men, that they divide them from themselves, and so turmoil their minds, that all their time they study still how to content a boundless will, which never yet a full contentment finds. Whoso this flame within his bosom smothers, he many fancies doth contrive, and even forgets himself alive to be remembered after death by others. Thus while he is, his pains are never ended, that whilst he is not, he may be commended. What can this help the happiness of kings so to subdue their neighbors as they do, and to make strange nations tributaries too? The greater state, the greater trouble brings. Their pomps and triumphs stand them in no stead. Their arches, tombs, pyramids high, and statues are but vanity. They die, and yet would live in what is dead. And while they live, we see their glorious actions oft wrested to the worst, and all their life is but a stage of endless toil and strife, of tumults, uproars, mutinies, and factions. They rise with fear and lie with danger down. Huge are the cares which wait upon a crown. And as ambition princes undermines, so doth it those who under them rule all. We see in how short time they rise and fall, how oft their light eclipsed but dimly shines. They long time labor by all means to move their prince to value much their parts, and when advanced by subtle arts, oh, what a danger is't to be above! For, straight exposed to hatred and despite, with all their skill they cannot march so even. By some opprobrious scandal will be given, for all men envy them who have most might. And if the king dislike them once, then straight the wretched courtiers fall with their own weight. Some of a sprite more poor who would be praised, and yet have not for which to be esteemed. What they are not indeed would fain be deemed, and indirectly labored to be raised. This crew each public place of honor haunts, and, changing garments every day, whilst they would hide, do but bewray with outward ornaments their inward wants. And men of better judgment justly loathe those who in outward shows place all their care, and deck their bodies whilst their minds are bare, like to a shadow or a painted cloth. The multitude, which but the apparel notes, doth homage not to them, but to their coats. Yet princes must be served, and with all sorts. Some both do, and counsel what is best. Some serve for ciphers to set out the rest. Less lifeless pictures which adorn the ports, Fair palaces replenished are with fears. Those seeming pleasures are but snares. The royal robe doth cover cares. The Assyrian dye dear buys he who it bears. Those dainty delicates and far-fetched food oft, through suspicion, savor out of season. Embroidered beds and tapestries hatch treason. The golden goblets mingled are with blood. Such shows the shadows are when greatness shines, whose state by them the gazing world divines. Oh, happy he who, far from fame at home, securely sitting by a quiet fire, though having little, doth not more desire, but first himself, when all things doth o'ercome, his purchase weighed, or what his parents left, he squares his charges to his store, and takes not what he must restore, nor eats the spoils that from the poor were reft. Not proud nor base, he, scorning creeping art, from jealous thoughts and envy free, no poison fears in cups of tree, no treason harbors in so poor a part, no heavy dream doth vex him when he sleeps. A guiltless mind the guardless cottage keeps. He doth not study much what storms may blow, whose poverty can hardly be impaired. He fears no foreign force, nor craves no guard. None doth desire his spoil, none look so low. Whereas the great are commonly once crossed, as Darius hath been in his flower, or Sisigambis at this hour, who hath escaped long, and now at length is lost. But how comes this that potentates oft fall, and must confess this trouble of their soul? There is some higher power that can control the monarchs of the earth and censure all, who once will call their actions to account, and them repress, who to oppress were prompt.
And here endeth the tragedy of Darius, with an extraordinary chorus preceded by an extraordinary scene. Queen Sisigambis receiving both the news of her son's death, and it appears about halfway down the scene. Again, there are very few stage directions in this place, but it appears that Darius's body, covered with an ornate cloth, has been on stage this entire time since the entrance of the messenger, or so I read it. Is that what happens? Do we think? Lynsey?
Yes. I mean, I think. It doesn't necessarily need to be on stage, but the messenger has definitely brought it with him, or her.
Yes, with them indeed, and it would make that speech a little more specific when the messenger talks about Alexander draping the body with an ornate cloth, if the body in the cloth were right there. And at the top of that scene, for the first time in this play, we get shared lines. Lines, for example, in which one character speaks some of the pentameter and then another character finishes the line. There's even one that's shared 3 ways.
I know, that was so exciting. I saw that and I was spacing it out of my script to remind me to do it.
It's like a real playwright. Our little William is all grown up. So any other thoughts from the room on those last couple of scenes? We get Darius's death reported twice. What's that about?
I mean, sorry.
I think the second time with the messenger demonstrates the dignity at which and the outrage that Alexander felt spared no cost. And that's a wonderful, majestic abandonment. When you just go, stop. Just give it away because I will get it back because I'm alive. But this person deserves, and then sends the body back to his mother with all the rites and all the funeral rites and all the pomp and everything covered. So yeah, it's a very, but forgive me, again, all of it can be cut down by half.
Go on, Lynsey.
It absolutely can. Yeah, Lynsey, then Greg.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting that what you see is the effect of the reported death on the people to whom it is being reported. So you have Alexander in the first bit, and here you have Sisigambis, which is a name I love. Why aren't more people called Sisigambis, I wonder? Maybe they are in countries where this is set. I don't know, because of being ignorant. But anyway, I imagine that you could stage this in a way where the messenger was really reporting this, but actually all of the stage focus would be on Sisigambis and the chorus rather than messenger speaking.
Yes, and Greg?
I really like Sisigambis' clever last speech. That was just a real study in quiet grief, I think. Though loud in some ways, but that sort of sense of, why won't my heart stop, or why won't my mouth close so I do not when my mouth is breathing. I mean, it's just like, oh, and really interesting. We mentioned this earlier. Sorry, in the chat. Celia, whatever it was, his speech last week, which was really just pure grief, almost screaming the palace down. It was wonderful to have a much shorter but really powerful speech. Also, I really like the fact he has the chorus yet again, talking about what people are doing on stage. It's not quite the death on stage. It's not quite somebody dying, but we talked about this last week. The fact that, the Greek chorus, of course, usually Greek at least, talk about what happens off stage. Whereas this chorus seems to almost describe what the person's going through on stage, just in case you didn't know Sisigambis was having a breakdown. Just in case, we'll describe it for you.
I agree. That last speech of hers is extraordinary and beautifully delivered, of course. I mean, a lamentation speech in general is a challenge. And a lamentation speech written by someone who's more of a poet than a dramatist, it sort of fills you with trepidation when you start it or start to read it. But no, in very few lines, Sisigambis spends this whole play longing for death in various ways, but sometimes longing for other things before death. She tries very hard in her previous scene to win her daughter's freedom. And in this one, this last speech is astounding. She talks about her body in such specific, such physical terms, and she talks and she's angry that her son has died before her, because that's not how things are supposed to go. Her son was supposed to bury her, but what's interesting running through this is Darius's last will, as reported by Polystratus in the couple scenes earlier. That Darius dying had said, that Polystratus reports that Darius dying said, "Please bury me, and please take my body to my mother." And I think it's quite lovely of Polystratus as a character that in the last bit of that scene where Alexander and Hephestion are discussing about going after the traitors and not leaving them alive and invading Bactria, and Polystratus just has two lines saying, "Please bury Darius," like he asked. He's doing his best to fulfill that last will of that dying man who confided it to him. The other, and here we do see that will enacted. Darius is finally reunited with the only member of his family who survives. We don't know what's happened to his children, to be fair, to Virgo and to the young baby. And I suppose the other thing I noticed about the second messenger speech is that it reports not just Darius's death, but Alexander's reaction. So we've seen Alexander react, and now we get someone telling us what Alexander did when he came to the dead body, which was apparently only just barely dead when he got there, which raises a question about timeline, I think. Now, Emily, you are stone cold excellent on these things, so go for it.
Oh, gosh, thanks. No, something that we were talking about last time regarding the second speech. And I love what you said, Tom, that it sort of gives weight or honor, which makes sense to me, because my inclination, again, from sort of more having read of the rest of the play and from some of our conversations, is that I wanted to cut the speech into bits and put it where it belonged in the narrative of the story, because it tells us sort of what happens when we left off with Darius yesterday, that, and he had to choose who to trust. And then we get that bit of the story in typical Sir William Alexander fashion. At the very end of the play, we get the payoff of that, but at least we get a payoff of that. That didn't happen with all the things he set up. So we hear about that. And then we hear again about Darius's death, but perhaps, a slightly different POV. Then we hear what should follow from the scene we just did with Alexander, of Alexander's reaction. So my inclination would be to restructure a lot of things. And again, to make a lot of these choruses double with, either we were talking about doubling with the woman. You could break it up and have it spoken by the actual actors. Liza, you were saying something about just having the voice, and if you're doing an audio recording, you could put echoes on people's voices, like it's from behind the grave or something. There's a lot of interesting choices, but again, I think we're seeing someone who hasn't yet mastered the art of narrative structure. I will wait for when you want to go on to the final chorus, because I think actually though, can I mention that earlier? Okay, so earlier we had the very exciting shared line, and it was bothering me because maybe no one else, but it was bothering me because in the script that we're reading from, everything is left justified. So you couldn't tell which line was shared with which. And that in some ways that wouldn't be a problem typically with rhyming poetry, with rhyming verse, because you hear where the rhyme is, so you know, that must be the end of this shared line. But with any rhyme, what you hear most is the final rhyme. So in a quatrain of A, B, A, B, you're going to hear the final B the most. So you're listening more for B, B than you are listening for A, A. You're kind of listening for 2, 4 more than you're listening for 1, 3, which is why in other people, like you can do A, B, C, B, and then A, B, A, B, and an audience wouldn't necessarily register because they're listening really for B's in the quatrains. And we had a slant rhyme, or maybe just we've got the wrong accent rhyme. So I was confused for a while as to whether this was like 2 very long Alexandrine couplets. They're not, it's both perfect pentameter. But it is very exciting, but I think this is a lesson in why, if it's a shared line, even if it's rhymed, you must format it so that it looks like a single line, so that it's tabbed in, so that you don't have actors sitting here going, "Wait, hold on, which is where, who's what's meant to happen." So interesting, exciting. Also, please format.
Yes, But then it's good practice, I guess, to indent it for ourselves, to see where puzzle it out, see where those syllables fall. And who knows what the original typesetting would look like in any case, given that compositors were varying degrees of competent and might have been drinking or eaten bread with ergot, or, I mean, who knows. So yeah, it would be interesting to compare the text we have against the original, one or more of the original editions. Yeah. Greg, is that a raised hand that I see, or were you waving to someone off camera?
Sorry, I was waving to someone off camera.
Cool.
All right.
Well, Emily, you said you had a point about the final chorus, or did you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. It was so funny because it begins in what makes vain worldlings so to swell with pride, who come of the earth and soon to the earth returned, which again is his pentameters with various rhythms, which is fine. But then he goes into the rhyme scheme that he's used primarily for the chorus, which includes, which I still haven't done, the scansion work on in terms of like what the exact very complex rhyming format is. But all of a sudden there are some shorter lines and then there are longer lines, and it's kind of this hybrid chorus to begin with, where we start, very much like the elegy, we're still in the vibe, and then about a third of the way through we get back to the cheeky chorus who's got things to say. But what's curious is that this cheeky chorus is talking, in the previous ones, the cheeky chorus is talking so much about kings. And in this one, it doesn't feel like the chorus. It feels like the playwright has things to say about his next door neighbor who he went to a party with and who dared to wear new clothes the next day. And I'm like, dude, where does this come from? You did not, once again, there was no setup, but you've got a really big payoff here. You didn't mention that like the traders were wearing new clothes in each scene maybe or something. I have Scottish heritage, but I do not have Scottish culture, but it does strike me that this, so maybe someone else could speak better to whether this is kind of lovely Scottish Presbyterian feeling of, look, just don't have a lot, live off the earth, owe no one nothing, plain and safe. I don't know, is sort of his final homily. But in a cheeky way, whereas Croesus was very nihilistic. This is still, it still has character, but it feels like the playwright, and I feel like I've learned a lot about the playwright from this final speech. And I would like him to learn that it is not a luxury to change your clothes every day.
Yes, Rachael.
Lynsey could talk to the Scottishness of it better than I, but I think you have that Stoic philosophy that's floating around at this time that's super popular, that, don't cry too hard for people who have passed or for these other things. And it could also be that perhaps that's coming in here. I might be breaking up, but I think he mentions the Stoics at some point in this play or the other one.
Yeah, it's Lynsey, go take it away.
It just not really about the Scottishness, although it really reminded me of when I made a visit to the Outer Hebrides many years ago, and on Sunday I was on a motoring holiday, and on Sunday everything was closed and people were driving to church dressed in black with black hats, like in the cars, and because I was not doing that or dressed like that, they just stared viciously at me. Because what are you doing on a Sunday if you're not going to church, kind of thing. So it was very, I mean, that was, a long time ago, but still within my lifetime. So it's kind of that sort of, we freeze, thing can persist, I think. But anyway, I didn't mean to talk about that. What I meant to talk about was sort of following on from what Emily was saying, which is, I agree too, is suddenly tonally, I just feel like we're not in the play anymore. The play ends with Sissy's last line, basically. And, I sort of feel like, people are leaving and the chorus is shouting after them, Get that off, that's far too rich for this, it's kind of quite, and it is a homily. And so I was looking at the speech just now, trying to go, where would you cut this? And you could pretty much just basically not have it, I think, that final speech, in dramatic terms, I feel. There's nothing new being said, and it does seem to go a little bit, it seems like from this grand world of these ancient kingdoms and rulers and glorious battles, we seem to be, did you see what my neighbor was wearing? Oh my God, slightly lowered the tone.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what Rachael was saying, it is a little bit stoic. This kind of tragedy owes a lot to Seneca, who was a stoic, more or less. It's also very Calvinist, in a Scots Calvinist kind of way. And that was very much a thing with James and his court. And Emily, what were you going to say before I was wittering on?
Oh, no, not wittering at all. Just asking the question, does it belong here? Yes, I think I like to make the case for it, because I agree. Yeah, you could cut it. You end with Sissy's lovely, last moment weeping over the body of our title character. Like that's beautiful. But the chorus has been so interesting and rather just like this to a certain degree. I mean, I was lobbying for the chorus being a dude with a pint glass in the corner of the stage, in which case, why not? But again, this may be better placed if we restructure it so that it happens in the middle of the previous cut up speech, or maybe right after Alexander saying, this is what I'm going to do to the traitors, and then the chorus comments on it there with that, so that it makes it feel that it's about the traitors, maybe. Yeah, because otherwise, I mean, it's a little bit of a Burgo mask, maybe, all of a sudden we're going to do comedy at the end of this. I think there are ways to justify it being cut down, but kept. So I guess one of the interesting things is I'm finding there are multiple ways that I could think of staging this.
Yeah, I mean, one of the intriguing things about this chorus... wait, Tom, what were you going to say?
Well, I think, yes, after the mother's speech, I think the final chorus, the problem was it had no authority. I watched Mercer Cunningham dance with his company, and he was very old, so but he was just on the side of the stage, as the chorus would be, but he had an authority that was like, there's the company dancing, and there's Mercer Cunningham, and so when he spoke those very few lines or those very few movements, so the chorus, didn't have any authority, and therefore floundered, got lost, or was just irrelevant without that concise authority that the play deserved, because I think we all did like his writing.
With certain frustrations, yeah. Lynsey?
Well, I mean, I'm going to make a very facetious point, really, but, if the chorus up hitherto has been bloke in the corner with a pint, what if there's a massive face rip off and everything, revealing a Calvinist preacher? for the final chorus. And
you had to ruin it, didn't you?
and all the characters are kind of, there's Sissy kind of having her beautiful, lamentable moment of grief, and there's the messenger whose tale has now been told and everything else. And other characters are there, and then they just slowly march downstage towards the preacher, and the play ends with them doing something dastardly to him. I don't. Facetious point. Facetious point. But.
Yeah, facetious but worth making, because one thing that happens in this chorus, which happens nowhere else in the play, is the mention of a higher power in the last 4 lines. Anyway, Rachael.
No, I was going to ask, what does everybody else think about combining the characters of Polystratus and Nuntius, because Polystratus kind of serves the exact same purpose as Nuntius. I mean, if you had it as Nuntius, you named the character Nuntius. It's he's gotten the message, he delivered it to Alexander, and then he goes to Sisigambis. If you keep him as Polystratus and decided to do that combination, it's like Sisigambis is being given all the dignity of this matron queen, I guess, of a fallen country, depending. I don't know what other people think.
That's a really good idea, and I mean, the only thing I would raise to possibly counter that, which isn't a negation or denial, it's just something worth talking about, is that Nuntius seems to have knowledge that Polystratus doesn't have. And I think, if I had to hazard a guess, Polystratus reads like he's Alexander's soldier, whereas Nuntius reads like a Persian. Because Nuntius seems to have knowledge of what was happening in Darius's camp before he was killed. And Emily?
Oh, just to go off in terms of, I can wait though. Do you need to finish more point?
No, I was just gonna waffle on as usual, and waffles are delicious, but over to you.
Indubitably. No, I love that idea of combining those parts. I think it makes a good deal of sense. Only because I played Virgo for that one scene, and I still sort of like justice for Virgo, because she has nothing to do. It strikes me that it could be, if you could do a very postmodern staging of this play where Virgo is all the choruses and is the person who like survives but suffered through all these idiots, doing idiot things, which would then, if she does the final chorus as well, would justify why she's like, look, none of this worked out. So if you do the justice for Virgo version, that might work. But I think this play offers itself up for some really interesting doubling, which then tells very different narratives. Same thing about who's on stage when, who's experiencing what through all these different sort of tableau scenes, who hears what. You could end up telling some very different stories physically using the same text.
Yeah, I like the concept of justice for Virgo. You could see during the last chorus, you could sort of visualize her taking off her rich robes and putting on some kind of poorer habit, and then deciding to go off to live in the woods as a hermit or something. It would be one way of enlivening that, the trope which we hear a lot of in this kind of drama of a peasant or a shepherd, an idealized peasant or shepherd to be sure, being happier than a king because he has less to fear. But it may be time to go around the room for final thoughts. Isn't this exciting? Final thoughts on this whole play, or as much of it as you have witnessed. Flying fickle finger of fate lands on Lynsey.
Damn that flying fickle finger of fate. Yes, I mean, I've only been here for this session, so I've absolutely no idea what went on before. And as we've been discussing in the chat, this play bears very little resemblance to the other King Darius play that we have also looked at many moons ago. I mean, I think it's very, I feel that there's, it feels like there's some text of value here. There certainly seems to be more of a dramatic effort. And I think even the fact that we're talking about different ways that it could be staged, and could we put that scene there, and could we, you know, all of these different things means that there are aspects of the text which are inspiring our imagination. So I would simply say, you know, we'll come back to it for a second look, and possibly prior to that discuss maybe some transposing of certain sections or amalgamating of certain characters, to be discussed.
Yeah, I agree that this play has more of a dramatic energy to it than perhaps Croesus did. You may compare the two for yourselves, because Croesus is available on our YouTube channel, read by indeed some of these excellent people. And final thoughts from Tom?
Yeah, there's a lot of passion in there. There's a lot of soul, and it just gets lost in the verbiage, and you just go, oh, please, just what you said was fabulous. So just stop there. Stop! Don't do any more, please. You're just going to ruin it. You know, it's a bit like us waffling on. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yes, our waffle, of course, is preserved for posterity on all of YouTube for the world to hear. Emily, final thoughts?
Yeah, it was fun to delve into the Sir William Alexander, 1st Earl of Stirling extended universe these past 2 weeks. Loads of fun to watch his experiments as a verse playwright, the failures and successes. And I agree. He just, if only in his lifetime he had met an editor, that would have done worlds of wonders. But never fear, this company is here.
Indeed, we are here to save the day. Rachael, final thoughts?
Yeah. I've said a lot over the past 2 days. No, actually, I don't know. He really kicked up the drama in the second half. The first half, it was a little more dense and confusing. It seems like he found a flow in the second half. Personally, and this is just my personal preference, I would like to see it end on Sisigambis, because I feel that's ending it in a close-up and then cutting to credits, as opposed to close-up, pan back, see like the island of see like the country of England or the beach side, and then cut to credits, which gives the audience, the chorus gives the audience a little more distance and time to get over the fact that they're leaving this play. But hers is something more immediate and pushes in on us, I think.
Yeah, I would be entirely in favor of letting Sisigambis have the last word. She feels, you know, unlike so many of Alexander's characters, she feels like a person. And when she speaks, you feel like a person is talking, rather than a poet is declaiming some verse just with a character's name on it. Yes, justice for Sisigambis. And speaking of whom, Greg, final thoughts?
Yes, the great Sissy shall speak. I've learned my lesson this week. I've said to Rob, if we're doing a play over 3 days next week, sign me up for the whole lot, because I'll give up trying to read the last session. Or missing the last session. Sisigambis, I mean, the chorus that I did in Act 4 was fabulous, and in its own way was just a really fun speech. Though he could have said it in 5 words instead of 50, whatever it felt like, 500,000. It felt like by the end of it. Basically, don't trust anyone. Darius is dead, fine. But we'll forgive him for that. But just occasionally, unfortunately, it seems as though they come more often nowadays. You get speeches like Sisigambis' that speech that just dive off the page at you. I'm going to say, I really wish Alexander had either met an editor or had met a group of actors who might actually put this freaking thing on. Who would then say, oh, will you just cut that long speech at the end, or give us something to hook, or will you stop putting verbs in the wrong place, or whatever. If this was ever performed, I'd be very surprised. It really feels like it just feels like an almighty mess that was created so that his fellow Scottish lords could enjoy a bit of a read in the wee small hours with a dram of whiskey.
I think you'd need an entire bottle of whiskey to get through this, Lynsey.
Clearly, we have to do the second look in Scottish accents. Clearly.
Someone recruit Eric and Alex. So yeah, I mean, in chat, we've been being quite salty about the fact that this guy is an earl. So it doesn't matter to him whether his play works on stage or whether an audience likes it or whether actors can act it. His income doesn't depend on it. His reputation doesn't depend on it. He's off, like, colonizing people. Nova Scotia in Canada. James gave this guy the charter to be the first mayor, and that's why it's called Nova Scotia. New Scotland, traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people who still experience oppression thanks to this guy and King James and maybe also the French. Emily.
Oh, yes, just to say, an earl would be able to do what they said so philosophically in the Muppets Most Wanted movie, which is when, which is when they said that the bad guy had in fact been paying audiences to sit and had been paying credits to make good reviews in the papers, to which Fozzie Bear wisely says, why didn't we think of that?
Waka waka, indeed. Perhaps a Muppet version of William Alexander's monarchic tragedies. I think Sam the American Eagle should play Croesus, or maybe Solon. Maybe he should be Solon. Emily.
Sam is the chorus. Sam is the chorus.
That's right. That's right. Oh my gosh. So on that note, I don't think we can top that. So all that remains is to thank our marvelous team of readers, to say tune in at some future point for the next tragedy in this cycle, an Alexandrian tragedy. I wonder what that's about. And to bid you adieu.